My Govan and Melanin, and welcome back to Medieval Art. I'm Dr. Brian Keane, and again, I'm joined with Dave Lewis of Cinemillennials. And Dave, I've really appreciated our fellowship over the last several weeks as we've watched The Rings of Power. And I hope that with the finale now behind us, that this is not the breaking of the fellowship, but a continued journey as we venture further and further into Middle-earth. In this week's episode, Alloy, we saw several major reveals, some of which are more obvious to book readers and those familiar with Peter Jackson's trilogies. So Dave, to get us started, what really worked in this episode?
I think the Stranger and the Harfoot's connection, the whole storyline there worked really well, and their battle against the cultists of Sauron. I think what they really do well is they get the most heartfelt moments, what we expect from these proto-hobbits, the idea of hobbits and the popularized idea of hobbits and sacrifice we get the little guy overtaking the strong. And I felt that that was really, really strong going into it. We thought about, oh no, the cold open where they had, oh, he's Sauron, the kind of like switch for people. But in the end, I do think that it was really true to the characters that we have, and possibly with a lot of notes as in smells. We get a lot of lines of it pointing to be Gandalf.
For me, that really was wonderful. It's something we've suspected all along, but we've also been deceived. We've had many thoughts of who this character is, and I agree with you. It was those nods to the Jackson material through dialogue and the visuals that remind us over and over again that we have been introduced to the Grey Wizard, and we'll see that journey continue on. I think also visually, there were a number of instances where Gandalf is contending with those cultists that reminded me so much of the conflict with Saruman. And we're seeing or hearing our first reference to the Istar, the Istari in this series. And that to me was another one of these beautiful nods. And I'm glad that we now have a stranger who is able to express himself and is fully dialogic with the rest of the world. So we'll see his journey continue with Nori as they go to the lands of Rhûn. And that's a place I'm very excited to see, which we can say more about later. But of course, the real focus of this episode being Alloy was about our time in Region. So how did you feel about our lead into Region and the events that transpired there?
I was very excited going into Region, knowing the lore, knowing what could eventually happen, seeing the trailers, seeing that the forging of the rings were going to happen, the 3 elven rings. However, I think that this part is one of the weakest parts of the show so far, when it should have been one of the strongest. First off, the Sauron reveal, I've made my feelings known about it. Not happy about it. I think the chronology doesn't really work here. When you look at the Tale of Years in the back of the appendices, the Elven Smiths are Sauron endeavors to seduce the Eldar. Gil-Galad refuses to treat him, but the Smiths of Eregion are won over. The Númenóreans begin to make permanent havens. Then you get the Elven Smiths are instructed by Sauron to reach the height of their skills. They begin to forge the rings of power. The 3 rings are completed in Eregion. Sauron forges the 1 ring, he completes Barad-dûr, Celebrimbor perceives the designs of Sauron, and the war begins. So I think it's interesting in how that they were going to go this way, instead of creating the rings, revealing Sauron who he is, revealing as an Anatar figure, rather than Sauron himself. And I think the offer and the use of Galadriel's lines in the Fellowship, and how you would be a queen, you would set up a queen, beautiful and powerful, at the same time negates the importance of her rejection in the Fellowship. We completely get this. All right, yeah, we want to have an echo, a parallel, which I think parallels are a big problem within pop culture writing, geek writing, for the nostalgia effect. We're also getting roots of Hithaglir is true. That's what powers the 3 rings. Why do we need we don't need an explanation for everything. That's another big issue. Tolkien doesn't provide that. And I guess all of the death and destruction brought by the Silmarils doesn't really matter. And like I said before, everything's happening too fast. Are we getting flashbacks or changeling appearances with Celebrimbor and Anatar? We're not really getting that Lord of Gifts, Anatar seducing the elves in this season. I think that should have come first. And then from there, we get a development where Sauron is overtaking or is over guiding or is guiding the elves into making these rings, and then Galadriel could have been the one instead of Celebrimbor to realize who he is and what he's doing. So overall, I was very disappointed about the way that they were going to go with this.
It's challenging. I agree in some ways that there's such wonderful storytelling in relation to Anatar and showing the long, slow deception of the elves. That was something I felt that we had at least a build up to this episode with many instances of deceit, where we even as viewers felt deceived by the writers. But then in the end, as we say, to be so rushed to making the rings, I think we knew that some rings were going to be forged by the end of the season. You can't have a series called The Rings of Power without something being forged. And I think it's beautiful that we have the elven rings, but I am questioning, how do we show a continued deception of Sauron now that we know who he is? What will his visage look like? What will his manifestations look like in future seasons as other realms in Middle-earth are corrupted by his influence? With the rings, I admit, I love the scene of forging. Any aspect of practical swordsmithing and forging that we've seen in the season, I think, have been very beautifully done. It's, of course, challenging when we're already used to seeing source material from the Noble Collection or Jackson's material. But I love the twisting of the bands for Nenya. I think that was really beautiful, seeing Galadriel's water ring. Of course, we also had our reference to Vilya, which we know is the ring of air that Gil-Galad and later Elrond would wear. And then Narya, the ring of fire that Círdan wears, that we haven't met yet in the series, but we're told we will meet Círdan in a future season. And that is, of course, the ring of fire that passes to Gandalf. So I'm thrilled that we saw that. And of course, your point about the roots of Hithaglir is an important one, because we've lost some of the magic of Tolkien. You don't need the explanation for where these powers come from. The materials in and of themselves have power. They're inherently powerful. But we have this forging with Mithril combined with gold and silver from Valinor, in Finrod's dagger. I loved Celebrimbor's reference to we need gold and silver from Valinor. I thought that was very beautiful and a reminder to the land, the realm, the untouched realm that we saw at the very beginning of the season. So that all worked. We have a lot to think forward about. I wonder in our final moments if we can think about our Numenor storyline and then where we're going next. So what did you think about that very quick but powerful scene in Numenor?
Yeah, I think one of the best parts about that was Elendil and Miriel's point about being of the faith, being of the faithful, about buying things and trusting in the one's plan, despite having that great pain with taking those risks in order to get the reward from the Valar, to get that eventual end, not the long defeat, the long victory in this way. And with that, the other side of that with Eärien and how I think she will be corrupted by the Palantir, forcing a split between the House of Undunier, the Elendil's house with Isildur and Elendil becoming part of the faithful versus her rejecting the faith, leading to the split, showing a true split of the civil war that we are going to see. And going forward, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of things in Rune. We're going to hopefully see new things, new explorations of places that we haven't seen before. I think we're going to get a hopefully more focused timeline with the seduction. Maybe it is a changeling. Hopefully we'll see more of that. And again, I just think that it should have been done a little bit in order rather than kind of changing the order to suit the idea of red herrings that we thought were actual red herrings, when in actuality it was very obvious.
Well, we'll also, to your point, I think in Numenor, we'll see the continued rise of Pharazôn,
Yes.
and hopefully the founding of Numenorian colonies on the rest of Middle-earth. And even in addition to Land of Rune, I hope we go further south and we get to glimpse the lands of the Haradrim. We've heard references to these places. So Middle-earth is all fair game. I hope that as Gandalf and Nori go into the east, that we meet Alatar and Palando. I would love to see the Blue Wizards at some point. So there's much to consider. We have many seasons to come. And as I say, we'll say Namarye as we go towards goodness, but I hope that we'll continue our discussions about Tolkien's lore and Legendarium. Dave, thank you again.
Namarye, thank you, Brian.